You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Okay, well, welcome everybody to another episode of Examine Life with Phil. And today here I've got with me Dr. Dustin Crummett. Did I pronounce your last name right?
Yes.
Good deal. He is currently doing postdoctorate research over at, and I wrote this down. There we go. At Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, Germany, and he's got a PhD from Notre Dame, which, did you get that in 2018? Do I got that right?
Yes.
Okay, good deal. And he's also published fairly extensively in areas of philosophy, religion, ethics, and political philosophy, which means he's if not the perfect guy to talk to on this subject, pretty close. And also, somebody actually recommended you to me to talk to about for a reasonable advocate for leftist political positions way back like 6 months ago. So I'm glad to be able to finally talk to you in person, because when I was talking to him, I was complaining that it seems like the politicians are like the weakest possible examples of arguing for various political positions, and I'd like to try and engage with the strongest ones, which is what you're supposed to do, but it's kind of hard to do if all you do is watch the news, because they're so obviously wrong in most of what they say. So yeah. I appreciate that. So since you've never been on my podcast before, do you mind telling people about yourself a little bit before we dive into all the philosophy and politics?
Oh, sure. So I'm living in Germany right now, but I'm from the U.S. I'm originally from Virginia. And I'm here doing a 2-year postdoc right now, working on animal ethics. But my dissertation was in political philosophy, and I published some stuff in political philosophy. So that's sort of my intellectual background coming to this, I guess.
Good deal. I lived in Germany way back, for about 3 years back, about 20 years ago, but I was in the Mannheim, Heidelberg area. So quite a bit ways away from where you were, but
I have a friend who lives there actually.
Oh, good deal. So you've been over to that area then?
Not yet.
Oh,
but he's come to visit me, but I haven't come to visit him.
Well, Heidelberg's at least when I was there almost 20 years ago, it was a great town to go hang out and do stuff in. So if you have the chance, I'd highly recommend it. I had lots of fun while I was there. There's a lot of very good things about Germany and the German culture that I really, really appreciated while I was there. Good deal. Okay, so as I told you when we were setting this up, I'm just doing a couple of podcasts on political philosophy and trying to get people from all different sides of the spectrum. So I had a conservative guy on a while back who was arguing why you should support Trump. Last time I had a guy who's like a libertarian with a capital L. He calls himself an anarcho-capitalist who doesn't fit into either category. And so now I know that you've argued people should be supporting the Democrats more or less this time around. So I wanted to have you on to talk about this. So what, to get some kind of good ground, what is your kind of like theory of government? What do you think the government should do and not do, and why?
Sure. Yeah. So I've grudgingly argued that people should be supporting the Democrats, despite serious differences with them. As sort of the least bad option. But in terms of my general political outlook, you could call me a Rawlsian. My dissertation advisor actually was John Rawls, so I feel a certain amount of filial piety towards him, I guess. You could call me a social democrat or a democratic socialist. You could call me maybe a left libertarian, and I would be happy with any of those terms. If we think about sort of like the philosophical foundation of what's going on, Rawls famously suggests that at least a useful device for investigating a just society is to think about what sort of society you would want if you didn't know which position you were going to occupy, right? You don't know if you're going to be rich or poor, male or female, Christian or Muslim, any of this stuff. The thought is the society you would pick under conditions like that is going to be one that is acceptable to everybody, because you can't sort of skew it in your own favor. You don't know which person you're going to be. And therefore, it's going to be a just society.
Yeah, it's a way of trying to make it at least somewhat fair and equitable for, if not everyone, most everyone.
If you think about, okay, what are you going to want the society to look like if you're in this situation? Well, you're going to want protections for your basic rights. You're going to want to make sure that you're able to live out your own, what Rawls calls your own conception of the good, follow your conscience, live the kind of life that you think is the best life to lead. You're going to want to make sure not only that you have sort of formal protections, but also that you have kind of the material and social resources needed to actually exercise your rights, right? You want to be protected not just from somebody, say, putting a gun to your head, but also from other sorts of more subtle kinds of coercion. You want to be protected from all of the different sorts of unjust hierarchies that unjustly privilege some people over others, give them the ability to dominate other people, exploit them, disrespect them, disregard them, etc. You're going to want to make sure that you have kind of the material necessities that you need in order to live, in order to in order, again, to live out your conception of the good, to participate as a full and equal member of society. That includes not only food and stuff like that, but maybe also healthcare, education, clean air, clean water. You're going to want to make sure, insofar as you're dealing with other societies, that you deal with them on equitable terms too. You're going to want to make sure not just that you have the necessities, but that the resources are shared more broadly in some kind of equitable way. It's not that you do all the work and your boss gets all the money or something like that. If you think about, in general, that's the kind of society you would want. If we then ask, what's the government's role in bringing this about? Well, I say, okay, so the government is going to be aiming to do what it can to promote this sort of society, subject to certain constraints. Some of those constraints are going to be kind of internal to the picture I just laid out. So if solving some problem would involve violating somebody's freedom of religion or freedom of speech, then maybe that's not something that the government can do. Maybe you need to handle that through activism or consciousness raising or something else. There are some things that the government is just not well equipped to solve. And there are some things that if you gave, maybe the government could solve a certain problem, but if you gave them the power to solve it, you might rue that later because they could abuse it in other ways or something like that, right?
Yep.
Now, when we, keeping all of that in mind and then combining this with the empirical information available to us, when we ask, what does this mean in terms of institutional design, in terms of concrete policies, these sorts of things? I think, first of all, you're going to want the society to be a liberal democracy of some sort. One that guarantees protections for basic rights, that gives everybody kind of equal opportunity to participate in governance of the society. You're going to want the economic model to be sort of a broadly social democratic one, I think, or maybe democratic socialist one. I think that just empirically we know that these are the societies that do the best job of providing for everyone's needs, distributing resources equitably, et cetera.
Could you explain that a little bit more? Because I know lots of different things get lumped under that label. So can you, but I don't want to give an objection to something that you don't think. So can you explain that a little more? Yeah.
So I guess you might think of social democracy as the sort of economic model that you find in Northern European countries, in maybe Australia and New Zealand and Taiwan, which combines a kind of a capitalist market of some sort with at least very generous redistributive mechanisms, with a social safety net, with, in many cases, universal programs to provide for college education or whatever, or for healthcare. With very strong protections often for unions, for workers, these sorts of things. So there's no kind of single easy definition of it. But there's sort of a cluster of things that go together.
Okay.
Which
so basically, if I apologize for interrupting you, but I'm just trying to. So basically, something like free market, but not laissez-faire, a little bit more limited, and where people can go pursue business within a reasonable manner as best as they want to, and then the government essentially taxes that and, so to speak, takes what we might term, for lack of a better term, the excess wealth and gives it to people who at least probably need it.
Yeah, that's at least going to be part of it.
Okay.
you might think if you wanted to move more into the democratic socialist direction, you have models in the form of, say, social wealth funds, where the government itself owns lots of capital. Again, this still happens within a market. Maybe the fund is administered by a hedge fund manager of some sort who, instead of...
That's what they do in Norway, right?
Yeah, exactly, right. Norway, Alaska has one. So it might be that ultimately provides some way of actually just kind of directly bringing the capital. I mean, there are different things you can do with it. You can, like Alaska, say, just give everybody a check, and so that might be a way of kind of directly putting the capital to use without needing like a redistributive taxation mechanism. So there are different ways to think about how you might want to do it, and this might depend partly on the context, things like that. But broadly speaking, that's the kind of economic model that I'm going to want. Okay. In terms of foreign policy, again, if you want to be interacting with other societies in ways that you wouldn't mind if you weren't a member of that society, then you're going to be opposed probably to a lot of the, say, imperial wars that the U.S. engages in. You're also, I think, going to be opposed to the fact, for instance, that the U.S. and many other wealthy nations have released absolutely tremendously disproportionate amounts of CO2 under conditions where in coming decades, that's really going to kill or ruin the lives of very large numbers of people in the developing world, particularly in tropical areas and so on. So it's also going to have implications for environmental issues and that sort of stuff. And also for many other issues, but it might be, maybe I've said enough to kind of set up the basic picture at this point.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot of things. That's pretty clear indication of what I would say, what you think government should be doing, and then how it's very obvious what like practical policies you would want to support that follow from that. The main skepticism that I have of this is that I think in general, I'm not as familiar with how it works in other governments that are not the U.S. government. So what I say here may or may not apply to, like, say, Norway or these other countries, because I haven't looked into data that they do as much as maybe you or other people have. But from what I've seen, generally speaking, it seems like when the U.S. government tries to do things like that, it's really, really, really bad at it and usually causes all kinds of unforeseen consequences. Like a great example of that is it depends on who you look at, but the estimates are pretty high that the U.S. has spent something like well over $20 trillion on public aid programs since President Johnson started his war on poverty. Roughly 2/3 of the U.S. budget is now for various types of public aid if you lump like Social Security, Medicare, and all those things together. And for the most part, it doesn't seem to have made very much of a difference. And it also seems to have been at least a contributor to a bunch of social problems that arose. And so that's the most, I'd say, substantive objection I have to the government stepping in and doing those things. Not saying that like it's a bad idea that we try to make society more equitable. That's very good. Not saying that it's a bad idea that we try to have less pollution. That's very good. But it seems like from what I've seen, the data is most of the time the U.S. government tries to do these things. It just mucks it up and there's all kinds of unforeseen consequences.
Yeah, so I think we just disagree about the data there. So we've spent all this money and it hasn't improved the situation at all.
At least not much. I'm not going to say there's no effect because that'd be stupid. That's ridiculous. I'm saying when you compare like the effect that government spending has in public aid, welfare programs like that to the effect that like private charities get, pound for pound, you get a lot more. It really helps people a lot more if you give money to private charities than when the government takes your taxes and does stuff with it.
So I mean, let's think about the actual sort of concrete results that these programs have had. Social Security, which includes old age pensions, unemployment insurance, disability payments, whatever, that was implemented back in the 30s. That made huge reductions in the rate of poverty among disabled people, elderly people, et cetera. Now, as far as I know, the first time that sort of a national poverty rate was calculated was in 1959. And in 1959, the national
that,
poverty rate was 22%. Now, in the 1960s, Lyndon Johnson began these Great Society programs. Since then, the poverty rate has never been anywhere near there. It goes up and down depending on the economy, but even in the wake of, say, the 2008 Great Recession, it only got up to about 15%, much lower than it was before. And if you look sort of at a time slice of what sort of market income do people have? How many people would be below the poverty line before you take the benefits from programs into account? And you compare that to the total resources available to them at the end, you see that these programs do bring tens of millions of people out of poverty. They reduce, if you look at the poverty gap, which is not just a headcount measure, but a measure of what's like the total amount of money by which all of the poor people are under the poverty line. You see that they close that by about 66%. So there are a lot of people who maybe it doesn't bring you above the poverty line, but it brings you up to at least a subsistence level out of extreme material deprivation. So I think that these programs actually do a huge amount of good. Now, why does the poverty level not get lower, though? We've been doing them for so long. Like, why isn't it just going down and down? Why does it just sort of fluctuate? And I think to understand that, you have to think about what the poverty measure is. So being below the poverty line means that your income is below a certain level. Okay. Now, if you're working and you're making the minimum wage and you're the only person who lives in your household, then you're above the poverty line automatically. Okay. Now, one thing that tells us is that being above the poverty line is actually a pretty low bar, right? Because you might still have lots of financial problems.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, right. But the other thing that tells us is that in order to be in poverty, either you have to be not working or not working full time, or somebody in your household has to be not working. You have to have dependents. Now, who are these people who are not working? Are they just a bunch of layabouts? No. When you look at the non-working population, it's children, it's elderly people, it's disabled people, it's students, it's caregivers, people taking care of either their children or grandma or whatever. And these groups make up the vast majority of the people who don't work. And they also make up the vast majority of the people who are in poverty. So most of the people who aren't working are people who either can't work or shouldn't have to work. Now, if you think, okay, so you're not working, and presumably you don't own a lot of capital, you don't have stocks or whatever. That means that your income is in the form of government benefits. Okay. And because the poverty rate is just a measure of how much your income you're getting, well, if the benefits are not enough to bring you above the poverty line, well, of course you're not going to get out of poverty, right? That doesn't mean it didn't help you. You got up to $12,000 a year instead of $500 a year or whatever. But of course, just letting the program run without benefits that are generous enough to bring these people out of poverty is not going to do anything. So yeah, as long as the benefits are insufficient, like the minimum benefits are not sufficient to guarantee that you're not in poverty. And as long as you have people in your society who are elderly, who are disabled, who are the children of low-income workers, et cetera, it's true that, you're not going to totally eliminate poverty. But of course, if you wanted to do that, what you would do is just increase the benefits so that you could bring everybody out of poverty. So it doesn't mean that the programs aren't doing anything. It just means that as an artifact of how the thing is measured and of the population that's involved, well, of course, just letting the programs run as is not going to decrease the poverty rate past the level that it already has. I want to say one more thing, which is that
Go ahead.
You are correct that American social programs are often very inefficiently administered. So there are many areas in which we might spend about the same amount GDP as Germany or wherever, and yet get worse services. So why is that? It's not just because Americans are like dumb and can't administer large bureaucracies or something like that. I think actually when you look at it, a lot of the reasons for that are because of the ways in which the American programs differ from the programs you find in social democratic countries. So, for instance, one big problem is that Americans are very against universal benefits. We have some universal programs like Medicare and Social Security, but a lot of times you don't want to just give everybody something. You want to make sure only the really needy people and only the deserving needy people get it, right? You don't, no freeloaders, whatever. But what that means is you sacrifice economies of scale, for instance, because you're enrolling fewer people. You sacrifice if you need to bargain with some company for whatever, in the case of medical services, for
like a pharmaceutical company or medical insurance company, you mean?
Yeah, you have much less bargaining power because you have fewer people enrolled. It also means that you now need this huge bureaucracy to oversee all of these claims, to make sure that people continue to qualify, blah, blah, blah. So I think these sorts of things are why the programs are often comparatively inefficient. And so as you expanded them and made them more like the sort of universal programs that you find in a lot of social democratic countries, a lot of times what you find is it wouldn't cost nearly as much extra as you expect because that makes them a lot more efficient. So that's sort of my general response to that.
That's an interesting theory as to how it would make them more efficient. I'm going to look more into that because my theory on this, and you may disagree, and that's quite all right, is that at a certain point, something like this just gets too complicated for any human being to administer. Like, if I say you call me in a couple of weeks and say, "Hey, Phil, I need help paying my rent," so I start giving you $500 a week or something. Well, that can be managed pretty well, and like even if I do that with 4 or 5 people, that can be managed pretty well. Where I can see, oh, this guy is just taking my money and not actually trying to help himself out. I can then go talk to him. I can, do things to try to make sure the money's actually go. But when you start talking about a government that's giving out essentially trillions of dollars to somewhere between 50 and 100 million people, it's just impossible for anybody to do that. It's necessarily going to break down because it's too big and too complicated.
I don't know. I mean, people are quite happy with Social Security. People are quite happy with Medicare. The sorts of large-scale universal programs that we have seem to function reasonably well. There are sometimes problems about them not getting enough funding, that sort of thing. But
I thought, isn't Social Security supposed to basically collapse in the next 10 to 15 years, depending on whose projections you look at, though? It's insolvent?
Well, yeah. I mean, it depends on them being adequately funded. And demographic changes in the population can make that harder if you have an aging population and so on. But in terms of just the administration, I don't think there's a big problem with the administration of them. And you also have to think about the fact, I mean, if we're thinking about healthcare, for instance, the American healthcare system, which of course is not publicly run or whatever. There's no single payer option, blah, blah. I mean, it's one of the most, actually probably the most inefficient healthcare system in the world. If you look at, say, the administrative overhead costs.
Oh yeah, I think my wife's a physician. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
And why is that? Well, a big part of that is because you have all these different insurance companies. The hospital is negotiating different prices with all these different companies, going through different claims processes with all these different companies. If you just had, a single government healthcare provider, say, that either negotiated one price with everybody or even just set prices in the form of price controls, well, then you would be able to do away with a huge amount of administrative overhead, right? And when you look at the way that, healthcare costs in the U.S. have ballooned from like 5% of GDP to about 18% of GDP over the last couple decades, which is not something that has happened in other countries. So, for instance, in Germany, we have a universal healthcare system. It's not directly government administered. There are these companies, sort of, but the German system. I think we spend about half as much per person. We have more doctors per capita. We have a higher life expectancy, lower infant mortality. We have no medical bankruptcies because you don't have to pay when you go to the doctor, as opposed to hundreds of thousands of medical bankruptcies every year in the U.S. So, I think, of course, you have to take things on a case-by-case basis, but I really think there are a lot of ways in which the American system is often very inefficient. Because of the ways in which it's not like the social democratic countries, but instead has these sort of weird free market elements or whatever.
Yeah, well, as you can imagine, my wife and I have talked about this considerably since she is a physician, and you're quite right that it would work better if it was a pure single payer system, but I would also look at it and say, but it probably would work better if it was more private enterprise driven as well. I think what the major reason why the US healthcare system has all these problems is it's basically tried to do both. It's one of the most heavily government regulated industries there is in the US, and it's also private enterprise. So essentially it's like we tried to get the best of both and instead we got the worst of both. And I think you're quite right. It would be better if it was more in the universal income, or excuse me, universal healthcare sense where you took the private industry out of it. But I also think it would be better if you essentially did away with a lot of the government regulations, which practically speaking, I know that's almost certainly not going to happen. But I think that would make it better too, where we just have the worst of both instead of the best of both.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there are some ways in which we have the worst of both. But I guess I think, you can look at other countries and see what a functional model looks like. There are different models. Again, some of them have, something like the NHS. Some of them have government single payer. Some of them have something more like the German system. But so there are different models, and you can look at it and see which one is best. But all of them, I think, require pretty heavy government intervention to control prices and to ensure that everybody has health coverage.
Yeah. So it seems to me from what you're saying, then the major difference between you and me is not like what we want, but that you have a lot more faith in the government to accomplish those things than I do. And again, I'm only speaking to the U.S. government here because I'm not intimately familiar with how the government does things in Germany or other countries. So it'd be wrong for me to then say, and I don't like the way they do it in Germany because I know almost nothing about that. Do you think that's a pretty reasonable sum up then?
I think that, it's not that I have just generalized faith in the government or whatever.
Okay, that's fair.
They're just such great guys and always do a good job or whatever. I just think empirically there are some things that we know that governments can do well, and even in some countries that are quite large and heavily populated. And so Germany is 80 million people. It's not as many as the U.S., but it's still it's not my hometown or something. And so I think that we have reason to think it's not like there's some way in which the U.S. is different and you couldn't do that.
I'm sure you've heard this before, but then so you don't accept the premise that the U.S. is too religiously, ethnically, culturally diverse for these same programs to work, because Germany has diversity, but not to near the same extent that the U.S. does, at least unless that's significantly changed since I was there, where their population, there's dissenting voices, but they tend to think and want the same things to a much larger degree than the U.S. citizen does. Like easy example with this, since we're talking about healthcare, I bet you if you polled Americans, probably about roughly 40% of them would say, if we're going to do universal health care, abortion needs to be part of that. And another 40% would say, absolutely not, no way. And so there's strong. So it's a lot easier, I think, for them, the German government, to do things. And I'm sure you've heard that before because you engage in these kind of things. So what do you say to that?
Well, again, I think, so there are particular issues like should abortions be publicly funded and whatever, where there are clashes over kind of fundamental moral issues. And you need some way to figure out what you're going to do in those cases. But just in terms of general administration of programs, even the vast majority of Republicans, even, Tea Party people say support Medicare, support Social Security, support these universal programs that they benefit from or that people in their family have benefited from. You might, for political reasons, have opposition to them as they're introduced, because people think, this is communism or whatever. But once they exist for a while and once people have started benefiting from them, then everybody's like, okay, this is great.
Yeah, that's more or less true. That's what happens.
Yeah, so.
Okay. All right. Well, why don't we move on then? So one thing that I think is important that a lot of people don't recognize that we should emphasize is that people tend to overestimate the practical power that their vote has. And this is especially, I think, the case when you compare the excitement of national elections versus local elections. I bet you 90% of the people have very little idea who's running for their city council or their county offices, even though in theory those should have a much greater effect on their life than who the president is. But everybody I know who's in any way connected with politics has extremely strong opinions about whether Trump, Biden, or neither of them should be president. So what do you say to that?
Yeah. I think, I mean, there's something to that. At least there's something to the thought that people should pay more attention to local races and, things where they can sometimes directly participate in some of the activities or address the politicians more directly and so on. And if you think about it in terms of probabilities, I guess the thing with national elections is that, your odds of making any difference might be minuscule, but of course the difference might be really huge, right? And so to some extent, I guess, sort of the expected utility of casting a vote maybe will depend upon how important you think the election is, what your chances of affecting it, et cetera. I think the best estimates that I've seen are that if you live in like a small swing state, you might have about a 1 in 10 million chance of affecting the election. It needs to be that your state is tied and it's the tiebreaker state. Now that's a very small chance, but I guess if you think, well, this could affect how trillions of dollars are spent and all this other, okay, maybe it makes sense then to care about your personal vote just because it's a small chance of like a huge difference. But of course, if you live somewhere else or if you think the candidates aren't all that different or whatever, then your calculation will be different.
Yeah, so you look at it kind of as the potential payoff is so huge that even though the odds are small, it's kind of worth your time. Like, I think it was a couple of years ago, one of the lotteries in the U.S. here was a payout of well over $1 billion. And so I told my wife, I'm going to go spend $20 on this. The odds that we're going to win are nothing, but it's $20. We've got $20, and the potential payout is so high, I'm willing to take the risk. And obviously, we didn't win because I'm doing philosophy podcasts and not in a mansion somewhere, but okay. I buy that. The only other thing that I say to that about people is what you should then do is kind of like adjust how you view your vote and start caring a whole lot more about those local elections where your vote essentially has a bit more power than the national elections. But because it seems like everybody gets super, super excited about the national stuff, maybe to some degree a little bit excited about who their governor and their senator is. Yeah. But nobody even really pays attention to who's running for their local city council and things like that.
I think that the national elections are just kind of sexier,
That's true, yeah.
Like, who are we going to bomb? And, this really dramatic stuff.
It's more exciting,
should we, like, build a new dump at such and such a location? There's not the same, like, drama and flair, even if it is an important issue that will affect the quality of different services and whatever. So that's probably part of it. It's just not as psychologically gripping, even if the stuff really does matter objectively.
I think you're right about that. My wife and I watched the governor's debate here for Missouri a while back where we live, and they did it very well. It was handled extremely professionally, appropriately, and they even had the Libertarian and the Green Party candidate participating, which I thought, hey, that's great. I wish they do that in national elections. But it wasn't exciting. It wasn't interesting. Well, it was interesting in the sense that the candidates actually answered questions, and you really came away learning a thing or two about what they thought about things. But it wasn't sexy and exciting at all, unlike that absolutely disastrous presidential one like the week before that, which was terrible, but it sure was fun to watch in some cases. So, yeah. Okay. So I have a theory, and you can tell me if you disagree with this, that I think at least some of the problems we see in our political process in America are actually traceable back to the fact that the Democrats and the Republicans basically have a stranglehold on politics. They've actually rigged the presidential debates to keep the Libertarian or other third-party candidates out, which is, again, one of the reasons why I like how Missouri did that. And in a certain sense, it's like there isn't a force pushing back against the Democrats and the Republicans. They can more or less do whatever they want because they know come the election day, they've convinced many people, you got to pick one of us. So it doesn't matter how crazy, stupid, or extreme we are. You're going to pick one of us because you don't want to throw your vote away. So do you buy into that at all, or what do you think of that?
Oh, I certainly, like I said, I'm only grudgingly encouraging people to vote Democratic. I have severe problems with the party leadership, certainly severe problems with Biden. I have been a Bernie supporter for a long time, and I think he was treated extremely unfairly.
Oh, that's certainly true.
Yeah. So I really have to view it as like making common cause with my enemy. So I guess the thing to say, I mean, if you're going to vote third party, you might do that as like a protest vote. You might do it in hopes of sort of exerting pressure on one of the major parties. If you vote Green, the Democrats will think, okay, maybe we need to throw the left a bone or whatever. I think if you're doing it as a way of trying to overturn the two-party system, that's probably just hopeless, because the American constitutional order is structured in a way that more or less guarantees that there's going to be a two-party system. There's like a political science literature on this.
I haven't heard that. Could you explain that a little more?
It's what is it? Duverger's law or something like that. But basically the thought is that if you have a system which the American legislature has decided like this, and the presidential election in an indirect way is decided like this. If you have a system that's broken up into districts with first past the post voting in each district, that is going to, with a very high probability, lead to a two-party system. For these reasons that, otherwise you have vote splitting between ideologically similar parties, and people don't like that, and so on. So I think if you wanted, and you find this pattern around the world if you look at different countries, if you wanted to do something about the two-party system, I think you would need basically to rework the U.S. government along the lines of some kind of parliamentary system with proportional representation. And that would actually probably be better in a lot of ways. There are a lot of reasons for thinking that countries that work like that do better in a lot of ways. But it's probably not feasible in any. I mean, it would require totally amending the very fundamental elements of the Constitution.
I'm sympathetic to that. I've said to people for a long time, it really should be the case that everyone, even people who I look at and think their political ideas are crazy, if you're going to have a representative democracy, they should feel at least like they get a chance to be represented. So I think you should probably have something like a very far left party, a moderate left party, a moderate party, a moderate right party, a very far right party. And people who all think that way should be able to go out and vote for somebody that they think actually somewhat represents them. That's the way it's supposed. If you're going to have a representative democracy, that's what you should be striving toward, I think. And it seems to me right now that lots and lots of people, for very legitimate reasons, look at the government and go, that doesn't represent what I want. The guy I had to vote for doesn't represent that's not who I want to vote for. So, and that leads to all kinds of disenfranchisement and problems, because people quite understandably think that government doesn't represent me. The far left and the far right both say that, and they're both right to some extent.
Yeah. So I agree about the problem. It's just, I think it's probably baked so deeply into American institutions, it's hard to know what we could do about it realistically.
So you don't think it would make a big difference if suddenly they had the libertarian presidential candidate on stage, and he wasn't he was an actual libertarian, not one of the deeply unserious people the libertarians always nominate, or he or she, excuse me.
It might make a difference in terms of, say, getting ideas out there, shifting the discourse, that sort of thing. I don't think it could result in the creation of a multi-party system. There have been times in American history where one party collapsed.
Yeah, but that's pretty rare.
Right. So absent a situation in which, say, the Republicans or the Democrats actually just splinter and the party ceases to exist, then there's room for a new party to move in and become the second party. But I don't think that there's any realistic way to have a more than two-party system, given the way that the American government is designed.
That makes a lot of sense, but I view it as kind of unfortunate. So, okay. So with that, what do you say to the common objection people say all the time that third-party votes are just throwing your vote away? Like I've had people argue for. The funny thing is people do this when they don't realize what I'm supporting. I've had people tell me, if you vote for a third party, that's a vote for Trump. And other people say to me, if you vote for a third party, that's a vote for Biden. And I'm thinking, yeah, it can't be both. So clearly something's wrong with what you're saying there.
Yeah. So that's the sort of thing that people say that I guess makes for a good slogan, but doesn't. I'm so in 2016 I voted for the Green Party.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not a heavy critic of third party voting, right? I did it. I guess my reason for so heavily encouraging people to go Biden this time is in my view, the potential consequences of Trump winning for kind of American democratic institutions, for our ability to address climate change in the future, those sorts of things, might wind up creating just irreversible damage of a sort that could foreclose the possibility of more positive changes in the future. But I do think that under many conditions, there's something to be said for either, again, voting in an attempt to exert pressure in one direction. That was my thought largely in 2016. Clinton's going to win anyway, I foolishly thought. And so it's important that we demonstrate dissatisfaction with Clinton, and then maybe in the future when she's running against somebody who has a real chance of winning, she'll act a little differently or, egg on my face. But, there's also just something, I guess, for the thought that particularly if you're not in a swing state, for saying like, look, these are both so bad, my vote's not going to make a difference. Like, I may as well just keep my integrity and vote for somebody who I like better. But I think that's there's rhyme and reason to those sorts of moves. It's not what I'm recommending this time.
Well, I agree with you in principle there. In 2016, I voted for Gary Johnson because it looked to me like both the Trump and Clinton were so far beyond the pale as to what was acceptable. And I even told people, like, encourage them saying, I'm not necessarily telling you should vote for Johnson. I'm saying you should find some way to make it clear to the party leadership that what they have done is completely unacceptable. And I would list out like 3 or 4 things like, hey, maybe you're a registered Republican or Democrat in this thing. Go to your local party meetings and say, how dare you put us in this situation? And, do anything you can to make it plain that it's beyond the pale that you would make us choose between now President Trump and then former Secretary of State Clinton, because that's just horrific and you've completely failed us. And so, okay. But you clearly don't see it as that way now.
Again, I thought that Clinton was going to win anyway. So I probably irrationally. On an emotional level, I thought that she was going to win, even though, I realized the polls, it was uncertain.
I think that's irrational. Almost everybody thought she was going to win. All the
sorry. I think it was rational to expect her to win. It was probably irrational to be as confident as I was.
Oh, okay.
Right. At least, again, kind of in terms of how I was making decisions or whatever. I guess, again, when you have 2 choices and they're both very bad, but one is worse than the other, you might think, okay, I should go for the less bad one. Or you might think what I said a minute ago, no, I should protest in hopes of moving the less bad one to some sort of minimally acceptable position. I guess and it's hard to know which of those is the better thing to do, right? These are very complicated judgments. A lot of stuff bears on it. So it's hard to know anyway. I guess sort of, again, the reason that I came around to thinking like, people really should probably support Biden, at least if they're in a competitive state. I guess I would have told people in competitive states to vote for Clinton last time, but I feel a little more strongly about it this time because, I do sort of think if part of the reason for voting third party is you want to move things in a good direction by exerting pressure, and the bad option is bad enough that there's like a non-trivial risk of it, again, foreclosing the ability to move things in a better direction in the future, either because we get so far behind on climate change that we wind up hitting cascading tipping points and really, really bad stuff happens, or because we move sort of further into the Republicans being a kind of anti-majoritarian party that relies on, things like in the past, gerrymandering, voter suppression, the ways in which the Electoral College and the Senate are already skewed in their favor. Moves more into some of the stuff that Trump has been talking about, like getting legislatures to directly appoint electors, regardless of what the vote total says, just say it's voter fraud, whatever. Either of those are things that might seriously just kind of mess stuff up in a way that forecloses the possibility of improvements in the future. And so that leads.
Oh, go ahead. Finish your thought.
Oh yeah, that leads me to think, okay, maybe in this case you ought to go for the less bad option, that at least maybe you can try to push Biden in a better direction while he's the president or whatever, through activism, through this sort of stuff. But there's not the kind of non-trivial, not that I'm saying the world is going to end if Trump gets reelected, but there's a little chance that the world might end. I mean,
See, I'd want to push back on you there, because I'm only 38. I haven't been following politics forever, but when I think of the elections that I've had in my lifetime, the first primary I remember voting in was way back in 2000, what then became the Gore versus Bush election. And I remember them telling me way back then, this is the most important election of your lifetime. The other side's an existential crisis. And if it doesn't go the right way, everything's going to end. And they told me that when President Obama was elected too. And I don't like a lot of the policies he put in place. I didn't like a lot of things he did, but as best as I can tell, with maybe one small exception, my rights as an American are still intact after his presidency. And, people were, I think in many cases, quite justly worried about what President Trump wouldn't do, because he said so many crazy things. But as best as I can tell, all of our rights as Americans are still intact now after almost 4 years of his presidency. So I'm kind of sympathetic, because it's not like these things don't matter, but I'm deeply suspicious when people say things like, hey, even the way you couch it very intelligently by saying it's a small chance, but when people say this is an existential threat to our democracy and things like that, because I'm like, yeah, I've watched you guys make this claim for 20 years and I've watched it go from both ends, and it's just never been true.
Yeah. So I agree. You shouldn't believe that just because some Politico tells you that, because obviously they always have the incentive to tell you this sort of stuff. You might believe it, though, because the evidence suggests that there's a non-trivial chance.
That would be a much better reason, yes.
I mean, sometimes really bad stuff does happen. Sometimes a country slides into civil war. Sometimes democracies are replaced by what political scientists call competitive authoritarian models. The current environmental situation is one that has not been paralleled in human history. There's never been a species that had the ability to make the sorts of large-scale changes that we're making. If you look at the science, it's not clear, what will happen because of that. But it seems like there's good reason to think it's going to be awfully bad, displacing hundreds of millions of people, making hundreds of millions of people food insecure, disrupting agricultural supplies, increasing the spread of waterborne diseases, increasing extreme weather, this sort of stuff. And there's some reason to worry that if the emissions are really high, then it could be all over, right? I mean, not in the sense that the human race will go extinct, but in the sense that our civilization will not be able to survive. Because such bad stuff happens. And there are very respected scientists like John Schellenhuber, for instance, who's a German scientist, very, very prominent guy. I read an interview with him a while back in which he said he thinks if we do the wrong things, the human race will survive somehow but will destroy everything we've built up over the past 2,000
I think
years.
I read that article a while back. I seem to remember that phrasing. So
yeah, right. Now, I'm not saying that's right. I don't know if that's right. But if there's like a 1% chance that that's right even, then that's something that you should take really seriously, I think. And when you look at the sort of stuff that Trump and other Republicans are doing, refusing to take even very basic steps to address climate change, that in many cases would be good on other grounds because they would maybe stimulate the economy or improve public health, for instance. I mean, Trump, not only withdrawing from the Paris Accords, which maybe don't go far enough, but were at least some sort of first step towards an international framework, but also doing things like promoting the use of coal, which kills tens of thousands of people every year by causing, lung diseases and so on. Phasing out coal is something it would be good to do anyway, right?
In as much as you can, yeah. But I mean, like before coal, people burned wood, and that was even worse. It polluted more and caused more problems.
Sure. Yeah, I'm just saying there are a lot of ways in which things like moving towards greener forms of energy that cause that emit less CO2 would also be good for other things like human health. The fact that the Republicans are refusing even to do that, even these very minimal things. I don't know. Maybe it will all be fine, but maybe it won't. And so there's a small chance that it won't. I think, that's something you have to take seriously, at least. When you're talking about
potentially catastrophic threats, even if they're a very, very small chance, you have to take them seriously. That's just risk versus reward, standard good risk versus reward thinking. When I'm going swimming in the ocean, the odds that I'm going to get attacked by a shark are really, really low. But if I do, it could be catastrophic. I could lose a limb, I could die. So at the very least, I should, try to keep my eyes open for a dorsal fin coming at me or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm with you there, but part of what I would, I guess, object to there is things like the Paris Accord. When you look at the details of what was happening, the U.S. was kind of the only one making any substantial commitments when you look at that. Like a lot of other countries like China and India made commitments that were more or less things that they already planned on doing anyway. And so I guess you could say, oh, that's a good first step, but look at that and it's kind of like the U.S. agreed, hey, we're going to take all these drastic steps. And then many of the other countries said, we're doing a lot of things too, but it was really just the same things they'd already planned on doing. It was a kind of like basically a worthless agreement for most countries except for the U.S. At least that's what I recall from when I read in detail about it, is especially the case with like China, where they really weren't actually committing to do anything, even though they made it appear they were.
Yeah, I'd need to look at exactly what you're thinking about with respect to that. But I guess I'll also think, I don't know, this will be unpopular, but it's also, not only is the U.S. emitting more per capita than say China or India right now, but historically we've emitted much, much, much more than they have, right? Because they've only recently industrialized. So when you consider that, and you consider the fact that we have the wealth to be able to transition over into a greener economy at this point, I guess it's not unreasonable to expect us to make larger commitments than lots of other countries, right?
That's you can even find biblical principles that would support that. To whom much is given, much is expected. So okay, that's, I'd say, reasonable, but that's why I wanted to have you on to talk about this stuff, because I can see from your actions that you're going to be reasonable and not scream at me, unlike most people on the internet. So. Okay. So I guess moving on, and then, because we're actually doing a good job covering a lot of ground. So you actually have written an essay recently about how most people appeal to abortion as kind of like a single issue that's not been published yet. It's forthcoming. Mm-hmm. But I think that's very, very relevant to talk about, because I know most people, especially if you're talking on like the conservative side of the aisle, look to abortion and say, that's got to be the deciding thing, pound your fist on the table. And I do think, and you can chime in after I'm done here, I think you can be a single issue voter. Like if in the next presidential debate, suppose either of them gets up and says, I've decided as soon as I'm president, I'm launching all our missiles at Russia. At that point, nothing else matters. Vote against that guy because, and that's a single issue, but it's so clearly so important that it should, and for lack of a better term, trump everything else. But I think with when people do that with abortion, they tend to do it in a bit more of a, for lack of a better term, lazy sense. Like when I was talking to Pat Flynn, the conservative guy I talked to a while back, he said, yeah, I think it does trump things, but I only come to that conclusion after I've done my best to consider the whole of everything, and I view that as kind of the tipping point. So what do you think about this? And feel free to reference any part of your essay that you want to. So
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, I think that in principle, I agree. You know, a single issue, what matters is not the number of issues, but how important the issue is, right? So in principle, a single issue could overshadow everything else. It's a little unclear to me how many single issue voters there really are, because often when you talk to people who purport to be single issue voters, it turns out, well, they think that the Republicans say actually are right about everything else too, and you know, so who knows they would do if. But I mean, in terms of single issue abortion voting, I'll say one thing which is not the paper, and then I'll say the paper. So the thing which is not the paper is this. It's so there are pro-choice people who will say, look, abortion reduce the number of abortions. They just make there be more unsafe abortions. That doesn't seem to me to be true. It seems they do increase the number of unsafe abortions, but they probably do reduce the number of abortions. Okay. Now, at the same time, there are many other ways in which it seems plausible to think that democratic policies will reduce the number of abortions by providing increased access to contraception, by fighting poverty, by providing increased support for families, this sort of stuff. There are overseas, the Trump administration has implemented a very restrictive version of what's called the Mexico City policy, which says that the U.S. won't fund any non-governmental organization that provides even information about abortion. So it's not about whether, it's not about whether
policy
we're funding
flips
abortion.
every time a different party president comes into power.
Exactly. Right. And so it's not about whether we're funding abortion. That's illegal on other grounds. It's about whether, if you have a clinic where if somebody comes in and asks for to them, whether you can get funding for other unrelated health services. And there's there are a number. I mean, there's an academic literature which suggests that this actually significantly increases the abortion rate in many countries because you cut off funding for places that are providing contraceptive access and other family planning services and so on. So I think at least when you try to look at, okay, there are going to be really complicated different effects from either set of policies. It doesn't seem clear to me that the Republicans are going to, in expectation, reduce the number of abortions more than the Democrats will. And I mean, if you just look at the U.S., I mean, the abortion rate right now is lower than it was before Roe v. Wade. That's not because of the law. That's because of fewer unintended pregnancies. And worldwide, you find the best predictor of the abortion rate is not the law. It's the number of unintended pregnancies. So my inclination is to think, look, if you have two sets of policies, as far as you can tell, maybe they'll have the same effect on the abortion rate, let's say. One is going to do that by coercing women into carrying pregnancies to term involuntarily, also sometimes leading to unsafe abortions, et cetera. The other is going to do that by reducing poverty, by reducing the number of unintended pregnancies, by providing more support to families. Then the second way is better. And so if you think about it in those terms and you agree with the empirical judgment, it doesn't seem to me like you really have strong reasons to vote for the Republican on the grounds of abortion, even if you're pro-life. Now, what I think Pat's view is, I listened to this episode. Pat's view, and he
fantastic.
So this was the part where he made the like dumb sounding voice to discuss the view that I'm. Was no, the legal route is better, even if it results in more abortions than the other route, because it's sort of very important as a matter of principle that unborn lives be protected by the law, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess then I say, well, okay, but if you really, if you agree with me about the bad effects that Republican policies are going to have in other, impoverishing people, resulting in worse health care, resulting in worse, health problems from pollution, which disproportionately affect poor and minority communities, resulting in the long run in climate change problems that are going to kill huge numbers of people. Then you have to ask, well, okay, even if you agree that this sort of, it's important in principle that you have the anti-abortion law, how many kind of, concrete living people are you willing to have die in order to make this sort of in principle statement? Are you willing to have suffer? Are you willing to be displaced from their homes, et cetera, in order to make this in principle statement? And I think the answer shouldn't be all that many. And so I think that even if you go his route on that point, that abortion still doesn't provide a strong reason to vote for Republicans, assuming you agree with me about these other issues. Now, suppose you don't agree with any of that. Mm-hmm. Now, this is where the paper comes in. Suppose you don't agree with any of that. You think that Republicans are going to reduce abortions by more, let's say, and you think that they're really going to reduce the abortion rate by a lot, let's say. A lot of times you'll hear this argument from pro-life people for single-issue abortion voting that goes like this. Look, abortion kills 850,000 people a year in the U.S. 850,000 people a year dying, that's like way worse than anything else that's a major political issue. That's just so bad if you look at the number of people affected by other things. Surely, saving this many more lives, that's more important than anything else. And so you should be a single-issue abortion voter. What I do in the paper is I suggest it's not clear, even from a pro-life perspective, that this is good reasoning. And to do that, we have to take a little detour through another argument.
Okay, go ahead.
So,
this is good stuff.
So there's this other argument, which is supposed to be a pro-choice argument, which appeals to something called the embryo rescue case. And the embryo rescue case is this thought experiment. It says, look, you're in a fertility clinic. The clinic is on fire. Down one hall, there is a 5-year-old child, let's say. Down the other hall, there's a tray full of recently fertilized eggs, very brand new embryos. You can only save one. Which one should you save? And even pro-life people generally have the intuition, well, you should save the 5-year-old girl, not this child.
Yeah, that's probably what I would do, yeah.
Yeah, right. And the person who wants to advance this as an argument against the pro-life view says, well, but look, surely you should, all else equal, you should save way more people rather than just saving this one kid. So if the embryos are people, then that implies that you should save the tray that has all these embryos on it instead of the kid. And that shows us that the embryos must not be people, because if so, then you should save 100 of them or whatever rather than this one kid. Mm-hmm. And pro-life philosophers responding to this argument will say, okay, but look, who you should prioritize saving is not just a matter of the number of lives. It's also a matter of other things. Maybe you should save Anthony Fauci instead of me, not because he's, I'm not a person or because he's inherently more important, but because he's got this really important job and, I'm just some layabout philosopher who doesn't do anything useful or whatever.
So a Secret Service agent will give their life for the president, not because their life is less morally valuable than the president, but for the obvious reason. Yeah,
exactly, right. And so then they say, well, look, it's true that there are a lot more embryos, but, this 5-year-old girl, she knows what's going on. She'll experience fear and terror in this fire. She has family members with whom she's formed relationships. She has, some conception of her future, things that she wants to do when she grows up that are going to be frustrated. And all of these other things tell in favor of saving the 5-year-old child instead of the embryos. So they're both people, but the 5-year-old girl, has a stronger interest in surviving in a lot of ways, and other people have a stronger interest in her surviving. And that explains why you should save her, even though everybody involved is a person. And I say, okay, grant that works for purposes of argument.
Yeah, it makes it like a trolley problem, essentially, then, where it's difficult to see if there is a correct answer.
Yeah. I say, grant that works. Well, okay, but then when we think about, should we try to save all of these fetuses that are being aborted, or maybe some smaller number of born people, the person who is against the single-issue voting argument can make a very similar appeal. Well, look, maybe the number of fetuses involved is much greater than the number of born people who will be killed in some war, or be killed by pollution, or be killed due to lack of health care or whatever. But these other people, they'll know what's going on. They have relationships with other people. They have, all the stuff we said about the 5-year-old girl, that applies to them too. And so it might be that, just as even the pro-life philosopher usually agrees, you should go for the 5-year-old girl rather than the larger number of recently fertilized eggs. It might be that you should go for saving, in your voting behavior, a smaller number of born people rather than a larger number of fetuses. And so I try to argue, the basic thought is that on grounds acceptable to many pro-life philosophers, it might be that this argument from numbers for single-issue voting fails.
Okay. So the immediate objection that comes to my mind, what I think of is, and at least with most of the other issues that people would point to, it's not as though you're directly preventing people from being murdered, and not in horrific ways. Like, dying from pollution is a bad thing, but that's not the same thing as murder. At most, you could say that might be negligent homicide. It's not like somebody came into these people's houses and ripped them apart with a knife, or did all the other horrific things that abortions actually do to babies in the womb. So that's my immediate objection is, they're not like morally comparable acts. Like, I grant you, it's bad that these many people die from diseases from pollution, but that's not as morally deplorable as if I was, standing outside their house preventing somebody from coming in and chopping them apart with a knife or something like that. Do you see what I'm getting at there?
Yeah, sure. So one thing to say is that, well, some things, like maybe civilian casualties from bombing campaigns or whatever, those are pretty close to at least, they're forms of killing. Maybe
it would be more comparable. Yes, definitely.
Second, so think about this. The fertility clinic is burning down, but there are actually two different fires with two different causes. Down the one hall is a girl, lightning struck and started that fire. Down the other hall is the tray of embryos, and some villain set that fire for purposes of destroying the embryos. Do you think that now you have to go save the embryos because they're being unjustly killed by this villain, or do you think that you should still save the 5-year-old girl?
That's a pretty good counter argument, because my intuition says I should probably still go save the little girl, but what I was saying to you would then point in the other direction. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But at the same time, it does still seem to me that there's something, I don't know, there's something more, and you might say this is like my own biases or something, and if so, we got to that point, that's fine. It seems to me there's just something more horrific about a baby being ripped apart and having its skull sucked out, and because I've done some research on this, and if you're aware of a case where I'm wrong, that's fine. I don't think there's a case of where abortions happen where it's like they just let natural processes happen and the baby dies. That there are some medical cases where that happens, but the medical community doesn't even consider them abortions at that point. Things like ectopic pregnancies and things like that. And so it seems like that's just not only much more worse when you're actively killing something, but in the way that abortions are done, it's truly pretty barbaric. It's not the same thing as it's a bad thing if I murder somebody by shooting them in the head, but it's a worse thing if I just rip their body apart while they're still alive. That's much more horrific.
So sorry, I lost. I lost what I was going to say. So the worry is about what the method. Oh, this is what I was going to say. There are some abortion methods which do involve just removing the baby and letting them die, removing the fetus and letting them die. David Boonin talks about this a little bit. They're used very infrequently because it's medically worse to do it that way. But I mean, I would guess that, for the most part, pro-life people wouldn't be, well, okay, if you switched to doing that every time, then it would be fine.
Well, I wouldn't like that, but it would be less horrific. I would say that's still a moral evil, but it's not as evil.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that might be going on here is kind of an early term, late term abortion distinction. You might think, that an early fetus is more like the embryo, whereas a later fetus is maybe more like a person, both because of the capacities that it has, and because it's the methods become sort of more gruesome or whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. If that's the thought, I mean, one thing to keep in mind, of course, is that many late-term abortions are done for reasons that I think at least many pro-life people can agree they're ameliorating conditions. It's known that the fetus is not going to survive. The woman doesn't want to carry it around. Generally speaking, I guess people are probably not going to, if somebody knows that they're pregnant and knows that they're going to get an abortion, you're not just going to wait 7 months and then, walk around pregnant and then like, okay, I guess I ought to schedule this. And another point is just that the number of late-term abortions is fairly low. You might, if you're running this kind of, well, it's just so brutal and we need to stop it on the grounds of the brutality of the procedure, that's sort of a pretty different argument from the original argument that I was discussing, right? This was appealing to, well, there are so many people dying, and we need to stop it on that ground. The number of late-term abortions is much less than the number of people who are affected by many other issues. So now you're running kind of a different argument. Well, the method of killing is worse.
Well, it is different. I was more kind of appealing to the fact that I think in many of the cases with those other policies you'd be referring to that could be at least reasonably demonstrate a result in people's deaths. I think in most of the cases, with the possible exception of war casualties, that it's not like the policy's intention is to cause these people's deaths. The deaths are kind of like an unintended side effect of the policy. And I'm not saying that makes the policy okay, but it doesn't seem to, abortion seems different where the whole point is taking the baby's life. Okay.
Oh, well, so if it's a matter of intention, then we're back in the revised thought experiment that I gave a minute ago, right? Because the villain who sets the fire, he intends to kill the embryos. The lightning strike, that wasn't even the product of, some foreseeable human wrongdoing. It wasn't a foreseeable product of human wrongdoing. It was just a natural process. So if it's just about intention to kill, well, then it would look like you ought to save the eggs in that situation, the fertilized eggs in that situation, which doesn't seem to be right. So it's much less clear when it comes to the ethics of rescue that even if you think that it's wrong for you to intentionally kill someone, it's much less clear that your reasons to prevent someone being intentionally killed are vastly stronger than your reasons to save someone from death in some other way.
Oh, well, could you explain that a little bit more? I didn't quite follow you there.
Oh, sorry. You might think, so some people think, for instance, that it's always wrong for you to intentionally kill an innocent human being. And that's kind of an agent-relative, that's an agent-relative constraint, right? It's not saying reduce the total number of intentional killings in the world. It's saying, hey, you right there, don't intentionally kill people. That is, well, because if it was telling you to reduce the total number of intentional killings, it might be, well, if you intentionally kill one innocent person, you can prevent 2 intentional killings, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the person says, well, no, don't do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's different from if I'm going to save, say, so saying that I have extremely strong reasons not to intentionally kill an innocent person, reasons that are much stronger than my reasons, say, to save an innocent person from death. That doesn't entail that I have proportionately stronger reasons to prevent an innocent person being intentionally killed rather than saving an innocent person from death from some other manner, right? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Well, I follow you that you're saying they're distinct, but I'd be like, well, but don't you just have reasons on the basis of being a decent human being that you would want to prevent other people from being murdered or killed in as much as you can? I mean, I think that's part of what you're appealing to when you're saying that these policies like pollution and stuff cause death, is you're saying, well, we want to be decent human beings. If we can avoid these things, we should.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not saying you don't have reasons to prevent people from being intentionally killed.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm saying is, from the fact that you have strong reasons not to intentionally kill someone yourself, maybe reasons that are so strong that you couldn't intentionally kill someone in order to save 1,000 people or something. Mm-hmm. Some people think that sort of thing. It doesn't follow that in a situation where you have the option of saving, say, one person from being murdered or 1,000 people from dying in some other way, that you should save the person from being intentionally killed, even if you shouldn't intentionally kill them yourself. And your reasons not to intentionally kill them yourself are disproportionately strong. It doesn't follow that your reasons to save them from being intentionally killed by someone else are disproportionately strong because of the agent relative nature of the constraint.
Oh, okay. I think I understand.
So obviously, if the choice is you save somebody from being intentionally killed or you go to Starbucks, obviously you have a strong reason to save them from being intentionally killed. But the question is, in a rescue situation where, in the voting situation where maybe both parties are going to do really bad things, mm-hmm. Do you have much stronger reasons to prevent intentional killings as opposed to preventing deaths that maybe are foreseeable but unintentional because the people causing them just don't care? It's not clear that the disproportionate reasons not to intentionally kill translate into equivalently disproportionate reasons to prevent intentional killings rather than, say, killings that are foreseen but the person just doesn't care either way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think I get you.
This has to be the explanation for why you should save the girl rather than saving the embryos in the situation where the fire that's threatening the embryos was intentionally started by somebody who wants to kill them, right? Assuming that the embryos are people.
Yeah, see, I look at those and more think this is a moral dilemma where one of the fun things about doing moral and ethical philosophy is we get to argue about these things. But in the real world, at least, it's very, very unclear what the correct answer is, or even if there is one. Like, suppose it's not my wife who's the doctor, it's me, and I've got to do surgery on this person to save their life. But at the same time, I know this person across town is driving carelessly and they're going to kill somebody if I don't intervene. Well, I think you could say, as long as those two aren't in conflict, I do have some duty to try to do both. But as soon as they're in conflict, how do you choose? And I look at that and go, that's really difficult. That's a great question. And I know that's one of the fun things about moral philosophy is we'll argue about, well, who's right? But I look at that as the trolley problem and kind of say, well, I just hope I'm never actually in that situation, because I really look at that and say, I don't know exactly what the right thing is to do when you have competing moral claims like that both seem very valid.
Right. And I mean, my view is that if that's your position, then that should probably translate into you thinking, well, okay, I guess I just don't know, what I should do in the political arena. Or at least maybe I don't know if I should vote for either major party or not, because, both of them are going to do some bad stuff and, do bad stuff to different people. And
that's very, very clear that they're both they're flawed in different ways, but they both are flawed. And anyone who isn't willing to admit that, I'd say they're either lost in ideology or they're just not being honest. And so I'm glad to hear you admit that, at least when you say I'm grudgingly supporting the Democrats. So
yeah.
Okay. Well, that's really good. That's a lot of stuff to think about. So here, I was going to move on a little bit. So moving on, I know you've said you're grudgingly supporting Biden and the Democrats. What do you as like, let's just talk pros and cons. What do you view as like, if you see any, at least pros and cons for President Trump? Well, I know you see cons. What do you see any pros at all?
Yeah. You might think that there's some chance that, I mean, it's hard to know. You might think that there's some chance that Trump will be less likely to like start a major foreign war, I guess. It's hard to know because on the one hand, he's sort of intentionally provoked some crises. On the other hand, he seems to have sort of anti-interventionist tendencies in many areas, even though at the same time he has, for instance, continued supporting the Saudi-led bombing campaign in Yemen, which has killed a lot of people and done bad stuff of that sort. I guess I think that might be a reason to think that he might be better than Biden, depending on what you think Biden's foreign policy might be. That's sort of the main one. I mean, there have been some other good things that he's done. For instance, he signed this criminal justice bill a couple of years ago. You know, that's something. It's not like Biden would have been opposed to that, I don't think. I mean, that had bipartisan support, but that was a good thing that he did. So, yeah, I mean, I really do think that on most issues, he's going to be pretty bad.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'd agree with you on the foreign policy thing because he's got these peace countries in Israel, and that's pretty amazing. I know some people said it wasn't going to work, but meeting with the dictator of North Korea does seem to have at least deflated tensions there to where it doesn't seem like we're on the verge of going to war with them any minute now, and that's certainly a good thing. And I know with the Saudi war in Yemen, from what my understanding is, it's either we support the Saudis in that or we support the Iranians in that, and that looks to me like a case of there's no real good solution there. It's what's least bad. So.
Yeah, so I think I mean...
Maybe you could take a more libertarian stance and say we shouldn't be involved at all, but that's a whole... I don't see that happening with either a Democrat or a Republican in office.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, there was there was a congressional resolution that passed trying to get the U.S. to end involvement with the war in Yemen, and Trump vetoed it. So I'm sure that Biden probably would cut it off. I mean, I think so. For instance, my read on the peace deals is maybe a little different than a lot of people's. I think it's good as far as it goes. I mean, it will lead maybe to better diplomatic relations, some economic growth, whatever. That's all fine. I think that you have to sort of situate it in this broader context of the U.S. and Saudi Arabia trying to create this like anti-Iranian front, right?
That's certainly true.
Right. That's sort of the real main upshot is trying to get everybody lined up against Iran and Iran's allies. And I guess I don't really view that as a particularly good thing because I don't really see the things that we and our allies do in the region as all that much better than the stuff that Iran does. And, I mean, again, Saudi Arabia is killing all these people. They famously murdered that journalist, famously are a very repressive regime. You can say similar things. Place.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, my thought is to the extent that we're trying to do something there, morally, the thing to do would be trying to de-escalate, trying to reach some sort of détente with Iran, trying to lower the odds of conflicts, trying to put out these little bushfire wars in places like Yemen, as opposed to escalating, doing the sort of realpolitik, line people up against Iran thing, because I don't really see increased conflict as something that will be good, because I don't really see our aims as particularly more or less moral than Iran's. It's just sort of a power play on both sides, as far as I can tell, and both sides are willing to do quite bad things.
Yeah, generally speaking, that's pretty much always the case in the Middle East, though, is it's all power plays, people trying to ally against each other. And I guess I'd be very sympathetic to the idea of, hey, try and get these sides to detente, but I don't know if that'd actually be possible. So
no. Yeah, I mean, it may not
less
be.
conflict is a very good thing if it can be accomplished.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Okay. And I know from what you said earlier that you don't really, at least I think you said this earlier, you don't really buy claims that like Trump's economic policies have more or less been better up until the coronavirus came in and everything got shut down, and that destroyed pretty much any gain that was ever done. But
yeah, no, I don't. I mean, if you look at, the economy did well under Trump, but if you look at sort of a chart of GDP growth or wages or the unemployment rate or the poverty rate, anything like that, what you'll see is that the economy doing well under Trump just exactly follows the trend of Obama's second term. Trump inherited a good economy, and what he did doesn't really seem to have made it do better or worse. He just sort of inherited a good economy, and the economy kept getting better. If you plot, say, GDP, it before and after, when Obama, at least for Obama's second term and Trump's first term, it's just a straight line up until the point where it crashes because of COVID.
Well, for at least the first year or two, that's definitely true, because it takes time for economic policies to take effect.
That's true for the whole time.
Even into like the third and fourth year, you would say that's still the case?
Yeah. I mean, look it up.
Well, at what point, if he gets reelected, at what point is it actually his economy then? Do we have to go into year 5, 6, or 7 before it's because of anything he said or did, or?
Well, I mean, I think if he takes over the economy and nothing changes, the trend doesn't change, then I don't see why we should think that he did anything to make it get better. What he did do was things like this big tax cut, which have increased economic inequality, which have led to, for the first time in American history, billionaires paying a lower effective tax rate than ordinary people. So I think, it seems to me, it's true he didn't do anything that stopped economic growth. He did do stuff that ensured that more of the economic growth goes to people at the very top. So I don't really see his economic record as, apart from the fact that he didn't mess anything up, apart from the distribution question, I don't really see his economic record as all that great. It's just things kept going as they were going under Obama.
Well, see, I would say he's responsible for that to the extent that he's the president. It happened, but I'd lay the blame for that more on the complexity of the U.S. tax code and how that necessarily benefits wealthy people rather than people who aren't uber wealthy. If a very complicated tax code will always benefit the wealthy. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, sure, but what I'm saying is that economic inequality, after decreasing under Obama a bit, has increased under Trump. For the first time, 2018 was the first time this has happened, that the average billionaire paid a lower tax rate than the average working person. So that was change. That was change. The current COVID recovery has been one of the most unequal, I think the most unequal economic recovery in modern American history. Trump wants to cut the capital gains tax, which will further exacerbate this issue of rich people paying the same or lower tax rates than ordinary people. I agree. I agree that the problems with the tax system and with the economic system more broadly, these problems that have led to wage stagnation. That's something that has built up over a long time under both Democratic and Republican presidents. I'm not saying that the Democrats are faultless here, but I do think that Trump has exacerbated it rather than helped it. Whereas there are reasons to think some of Biden's policies will do the opposite.
See, excuse me. I know you're right that the economic recovery that's happening is disproportionately benefiting wealthy people and the wealthy businesses and stuff like that. But that looks to me not to be like necessarily because of something Trump did. It's just a function of how the lockdowns worked, where they would say to like the local family-run furniture store, okay, you got to shut down. But Walmart's an essential business, so they're going to stay open. And consequently, the family-run business isn't selling furniture. They're not making money. They're in very hard times. But it's not that there's like a pent-up demand for furniture. Everybody just went to Walmart and got it. And so that I look at that and go, well, yeah, of course, these wealthy people and these bigger corporations were able to weather this much, much better. It shouldn't be that way, but that's not something that like President Trump did at the top down. That's how these lockdowns were implemented at the local and state levels.
Yeah, okay, so maybe Trump can't be blamed for that. Now, what's the appropriate response to that? Is the appropriate response to cut the capital gains tax? I mean, well, no, I don't think so.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay. So you and I probably agree to a large extent about the cons with President Trump. Like, I really, really wish he'd never go on Twitter again. It really bothers me in a very unserious and uncareful way about virtually everything. Even when he's saying something that I know is technically right, he says it in such a stupid way that it sounds wrong, even if I know it is. And there's multiple examples of that. The press does savage him more than he deserves. It's very common that he'll say something very, very dumb, and then when you read the press's summary of it, they say it was super outrageous when it was just really dumb. And I don't like that he seems to be as best as I can tell, he's probably a narcissistic guy and things along those lines. Well, do you have anything to add there? Those are my main complaints about him. Is he's just a very, very not a very nice person. Like, here's a good example of this. I don't like most of the policies President Obama had, but I would not at all mind having him living as my neighbor and knowing him personally. I'm more sympathetic to some of the policies President Trump has, but I do not want him living as my neighbor, and I don't want to know him personally.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly agree with all of that. I mean, I guess I would add, it's not just that Trump, is sort of boorish and venal or whatever, but he also, it seems to have committed sexual assault. He has cheated people in business. I mean, he's done a lot of personally, things that are not just kind of off-putting and not worthy of the presidency or whatever, but things that like should probably result in you going to jail.
That are morally condemnable at the very least. Yeah, sure. So otherwise, I would agree with all that. Yeah. Okay. Well, you kind of alluded to some of this before, but then, like, how do you view Biden?
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, I'm not a fan of Biden personally. I have problems with the platform. There are many ways in which I don't trust him, et cetera. But I do think that, if you look at a lot of his policies, they'll be maybe not everything you would hope, but will be better than Trump's policies in a lot of ways. I mean, so for instance, both Goldman Sachs and Moody's Analytics predict that the economy will grow more under Biden, partly because of more stimulus spending and that sort of stuff. And Moody's thinks that more of the wage growth more of the economic growth will go to workers than under Trump's policies. Now, neither of these are like socialist institutions. Neither of these are, they're both making these predictions because they have like an economic stake in predicting what's going to happen, So I don't think that these are like biased sources or whatever. And you can see why, people can look up those predictions and read the reports and see why they think that. I think Biden is going to do more to invest in green energy, say, which helps both the climate change problem and the people dying from air pollution problem. I think Biden will be better for workers, for instance. He supports this Protecting the Right to Organize Act, which has a lot of a lot of pro-union protections in it. He'll likely staff the National Labor Relations Board with people who are more pro-worker. So there are a lot of issues on which Biden. I mean, Trump has repeatedly tried to cut funding for PEPFAR, for instance, which is
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, so PEPFAR, this was a Bush administration program. It's the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief. So it's mostly based in Africa. It's sort of a program to, I mean, they do a bunch of things to fight AIDS. For instance, the training healthcare workers, giving people drugs that help keep them alive, things that help prevent, say, babies from HIV positive people from being born with HIV. Biden was, when he was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he played an important role in getting that passed and getting that reauthorized. If you look at the State Department's this is a program that has saved millions and millions of lives, has resulted in millions of babies being born without HIV, has trained hundreds of thousands of healthcare workers. Extremely good results for, like $6 billion a year. I mean, it's trivial compared to, say, the $100 billion a year increase that Trump has made in the military budget. But Trump's budget requests to Congress repeatedly have tried to cut funding for this. And I think that's a very bad thing. So far, Congress has not done it. So maybe that doesn't matter because Congress just won't do it if Trump gets reelected. But, I mean, there are also other things like that don't get so much attention, but that actually have really, are actually probably some of the most important things that the U.S. government does because they affect so many people in other places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that.
And because the things being done are comparatively so cost effective. Where, we have some reason to think based on Biden's record and Trump's record that if there's any change, the change will be better under Biden than under Trump. So
I think it'd be fair to say, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, I could go on about that, but I think there are sort of a range of different issues on which Biden will sort of move things in a better direction, probably.
I think it would be very, very fair to say that, at least in general, what you might call social or public aid spending along those lines, both here in the U.S. and in other countries, would be significantly greater under President Biden than it will be under President Trump. In fact, you could probably say that about any Democrat who'd be president versus any Republican who'd be president, because that's just how the parties tend to line up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And insofar as I think that tends to be a good thing, then that's, of course, something that I support.
Okay. And so what are the things you then don't like about him? Like you said, you're grudgingly supporting him.
Yeah.
So, and I assume from the way you said that, it's not just the general reservations we should all have about any politician.
Right. Yeah. I mean, certainly there are things about his personal behavior or his political record that are very concerning. For instance, his support for this crime bill in the 90s. You might reasonably worry about the sort of foreign policy that he'll enact. I think there are many areas in which, though his policies might be okay or be an improvement, I think that they won't go far enough. I mean, so I would like, again, some sort of truly universal healthcare plan as opposed to what he's proposing, which is, just sort of an incremental improvement on Obamacare, maybe. I think that, I mean, insofar as we're concerned about the economic stuff, he, like other other Democratic politicians over the past couple decades, has been, has gone along with these increases in economic inequality, wage stagnation for ordinary people, so on. So, I think that there are, you supported the Iraq War, so I mean, there are a long list of ways in which, his personal character I don't like, his record, many things I don't like, many of his policies, even if I think that they would be better than Trump's, are still not, maybe they don't go far enough for me. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I have very serious disagreements with him, even though I think, probably his policies would, be much better for millions of people than Trump's would.
Okay. Well, if you genuinely think that, that's a good reason,
Yeah.
I know the two main concerns I have is the first is that it seems to me that the Democratic Party in America, at least recently, has moved very, very far to the political left, and not in the sense of like, I get the sense you're much more on the political left than I am, but you're a reasonable guy. You and I can have talks and discussions, and I bet if we sat in a room and disagreed, we could at least come to agreements like, well, let's put all this other stuff aside and we can do this or something like that. But like the riots that have been going on in the U.S. over the past 6-8 months or so, it hasn't been for the most part right-wing people who are doing that. If those people are going to vote, they're going to vote against Trump. And it doesn't seem to me, at least from what I'm seeing, that the Democratic Party and their leadership is saying, no, we need to stop this. We don't want more authoritarians. We don't want more riots and things like that. They're kind of saying, winking and nodding, going, come on. And that bothers me. And it does bother me also that there does really seem to be an increasing, for lack of a better term, authoritarian tendency on the left, where they're saying, we're not even going to talk and discuss with people who we disagree with. If you think we're wrong, you're evil, and on it goes. And I'm not saying that that doesn't exist on the right too, it does, but it seems to be coming far more strongly from the left these days. And it doesn't look to me like the leadership is really doing it. No, that's too much, stop it. Like Kamala Harris, it seems to me, does have those tendencies. She's a real authoritarian, and I think met all the wrong senses. And Biden picked her as vice president. And so that really concerns me, that if he gets elected, all those elements are just going to get even stronger, and I don't see those as a good thing.
So, I mean, I guess, yeah. So let's think about the alleged authoritarian. You're thinking of like cancel culture type stuff.
Things along those lines. It's like, yeah, and that seems to be coming more from the left than the right. It's definitely both, but it seems to be far more coming from the left, and for the most part, they're like, yeah, bring it on, give us more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess I think that's, first of all, what you're objecting to is a kind of cultural issue. I don't know. I mean, it's not like Biden or Trump can directly do anything about that. It's not a policy issue. It's sort of a cultural issue.
That's true. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Trump, by like constantly making everybody really mad on the left, I would guess might very well exacerbate that much more than Biden will. Yeah. So now, I mean, in terms of sort of a broader free speech issue, whatever, I guess I would say, I don't know. I mean, there's certainly this perception that the left is more censorious. And I guess the left has more power in a lot of cultural institutions, so maybe to that extent it could be true. I'm not really sure. I mean, when you look at, say, the percent of Republicans who want to, a constitutional amendment banning burning the American flag, or you look at, say, what happened to people who opposed the Iraq War, look at the Dixie Chicks, I mean, there's plenty of censoriousness on the right too. It's just that it's sort of directed at different issues. I don't really know how to quantify censoriousness. I certainly, I mean, I think that, I mean, I am definitely a pro-free speech person, and I think that if you're on the left, you should be. If you look at the history of how, I mean, this is another question about something. If you look at the history of how, say, like anti-war dissidents have been prosecuted, these sorts of things. I mean, in general, if you're on the left and you think that people with power are really not to be trusted, then, well, the last thing you want to do is give people with power untrammeled ability to stifle dissent. Yeah, right. So even though, often I agree with people that whatever they're objecting to is quite a bad thing to say or whatever, I do, more or less want a culture where people can talk about things, because I worry about the implications of that not happening. But I don't really see that as an electoral issue. I see that as a cultural issue.
You're right about that. It's just more in the case that it seems like those elements of the again, I'm using terms very ambiguously and generally here, but those elements that, for lack of a better term, are in the political left or the extreme political left have kind of attached themselves to Biden in opposition to Trump. And so
but
maybe it's more of like a symbolic
on the real
vote against them or something. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak over you.
Oh, sorry. Well, I guess I was interrupting you. I was just saying, it's not like anybody who's actually on sort of the activist left likes Biden.
That's true. Good point.
It's true that like me, maybe I'm on the activist left, we might make common cause with Biden against Trump, but it's not like any of us like Biden, and I think, I mean, honestly, I think, the courts have often been, when you're thinking about government actions, at least, the courts have often been one of the strongest protectors of free speech. Not always, again, sometimes when they license prosecuting dissidents and whatever. But I guess I would think it's the Republicans who have been, over the past couple decades, really heavily politicizing the courts. By trying to, through a very conservative effort among sort of the conservative legal world to install conservative judges and so on, through, most recently blocking Garland and then installing Barrett.
That was wrong when they did that. I would say you could throw the same charge back at the Democrats because they both done it. But yeah, that was wrong when the Republicans did that. I remember saying to my wife at the time, they ought to just hold a hearing and vote him down. This is going to come back and bite them later, like it did.
Yeah, so I think that one thing that people, and this applies to sort of religious liberty issues and other things, one thing that defenders of civil liberties, I think, should be worried about is kind of the increasing politicization of the courts.
Yeah, that bothers me a lot.
I really think, suppose that Trump wins another term and he gets to replace Breyer or whatever. Then, people are talking about court packing now. But if it's like a 7-2 conservative court, good God, what else are the Democrats going to do, right? So I think you should really be worried about the Republicans right now have the upper hand in the courts and have for a while. They're sort of overplaying their hand. And at some point, the Democrats are going to get power, and if they've overplayed their hand too much, there's going to be a reaction, and then once that happens, the courts are never going to be unpoliticized, right?
Yeah, I can see your concern there, and I agree with you if I'm not being sympathetic to you. I've heard a lawyer say it one time like this: if you can tell how a judge is going to rule on a case by whether a Democrat or a Republican appointed them, you've got a really, really big problem, and increasingly that is the case, and it should not be. So, yeah. Okay. The only other real concern I'd have for Biden that we haven't addressed, and I want to stipulate in saying this, that I don't take joy from this, and I don't want to be mean, but I do have concerns that he might actually be in some kind of cognitive decline, because he was vice president for 8 years. We all heard him give speeches and things like that. In fact, I love listening to his speeches. I found most of them flat out hilarious. I really enjoyed listening to him because I found him so funny. But it does seem like he's not the same person now as he was when he was vice president. And that concerns me that it could well be the case that Biden becomes president and he's not actually running the show. It's his handlers or maybe potentially Kamala Harris. So,
yeah.
And I don't take pleasure in that. I don't like to say that about anybody. I want to be clear that I'm not happy, but there does seem to be some evidence that something like that is the case.
Sure. I can't make a medical diagnosis of Biden or whatever. It is true. It does seem like he's not as sharp as he used to be. At the same time, it's not like Trump is a mixture, a picture of perfectly balanced mental health. It's not totally clear to me that weighs heavily in one direction rather than another. I guess I don't know. I'm concerned mostly with policy issues rather than personal issues. So, if Biden, needs to check out early in the afternoon or whatever and go take a nap or something. As long as he implements the sort of policy agenda that as compared to the Trumpian policy agenda, I want to see enacted, I guess I'm sort of okay with that, even though obviously it's not an ideal situation. But it's not going to be an ideal situation either way.
Well, that's pretty fair. In fact, that's more or less what Pat said to me when he was talking to me, is he was concerned more about policy than personality. So, yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, we've pretty much covered most of the stuff that I want to cover. Just for fun, do you want to make a prediction about how you think it's going to turn out? You don't have to if you don't want to.
Yeah, it's very hard to say. I would guess that if the election goes normally, or as normally as could be expected under these conditions, Biden will likely win. Who knows what will happen with mail-in votes? There are a lot of ways that like funny stuff could go down, and then it's sort of all bets are off, So that makes me, who knows? But I think that, it seems like a lot more people are planning to vote for Biden, and Trump does have an electoral college advantage, but it seems like it's probably going to be enough to overcome that, assuming votes are counted normally and people, ballots don't get thrown out because they were incorrectly postmarked or whatever. And, that would be my guess, but who knows?
I really hope it goes normally, and I really hope, however it goes, it's decisive enough that any accusations of fraud wouldn't sway it in one way or another, because the last thing we need is lawsuits in the courts about this forever, and it's not clear who is the president, because that would just be truly awful.
Honestly, I'm not upset about the fact that I'm going to be in Germany rather than the U.S.
I don't blame you. Yeah, we live in a small, relatively rural town, and I've told my wife I'm very glad, given the stuff that's been going on for the past year, that we don't live in one of the major cities. That's a bad place to be for many reasons right now. And it also concerned me. I saw this happening like 6 months ago, that both the sides started putting out the stuff so they could spin the narrative of the election's illegitimate. I saw that from the Republicans, and I saw it from the Democrats, and that is wrong. It shouldn't be that way, but it is what's happening. So, up till about, I'd say 2 or 3 weeks ago, I kind of thought that Trump was going to win, because there's some cause to be skeptical of some of the polls, and a lot of the other signs were there, and an incumbent always has advantage and things like that. But now Biden's gone so far ahead in the polls, I'm like, I can be skeptical to some degree, but getting from, say, he's 4 or 5 points up to victory is a lot easier a task than going from he's 10 to 14 points up to saying, they're so wrong. So now I'm not really convinced of that anymore. So
yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks again for talking to me. I really appreciate it. I thought this was a very good, productive discussion. I really, really enjoyed engaging with you. Do you have anything else to say before we sign off? I've got to run and go get my daughter from school pretty quick here.
No, I'll let you go. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you. Yeah. You've got a website people can check out if they want to read some more of your essays and stuff?
DustinCrummett.com.
Okay.
And people, I'm on Twitter and Facebook and so on too, if people want to look there. But
okay. Okay, I realize that discussion went kind of long for my podcast, about twice the length they usually are, but there's a lot of material to cover, and I felt like Dustin and I had a lot of good back and forth. I really enjoyed that, and I learned a few things from him, and I hope you did as well. So as always, write in and let me know what you think. Let me know if you disagreed with me, if you disagreed with Dr. Crummett, if you liked how the format went and enjoyed that discussion as much as I did. You can always reach me for any kind of comment at theexaminedlifewithphil@gmail.com, or look up the Facebook page. Just type in The Examined Life with Phil and you'll find it. Next week, what I will do is I will give you my thoughts and perspectives on practical political philosophy and all the issues you should grapple with when voting and things along those lines. And I don't think that'll take 2 hours like many of these discussions have taken. I'll probably be able to make it a normal-sized podcast. So I'll get that out to you right in time for the election. So by the time this is all done, you should have about 9, maybe 10 hours of good political philosophy to dig into to help you think about what you should do for voting, or even whether or not you should go vote. So I'll be back with that for you next week.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization, and don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.